Gerry, pleasure for you to join us on the show. There's a lot to talk about. Maybe let's start here. And this way you can also talk a little bit about RedBird and the origin of RedBird. What was the sports investment thesis when you started RedBird? What was this, more than a decade ago now? And what would you say the sports investment thesis is today, and how do they differ?
Great question. So, the sports investment thesis when I started RedBird a decade ago, really you have to look back to, 15 years earlier when we created the S Network when I was at Goldman with the Steinbrenners. And the model that we sort of perfected was not just the regional sports network model. It really was a way of investing in sports, which will answer the second part of your question. It was always about bringing scalable company building like capital and a company building mentality in partnership with the ultimate rights holder and helping them monetize their intellectual property, which usually meant creating new companies around that intellectual property. Fast forward to today, if you asked anybody what is investing in sports, everybody thinks it's taking minority stakes in teams. I don't think, at least for my type of capital, I don't think that's a great investment. I want to have an involvement, a partnership in the actual governance, in the underwriting of the business plan. And the great thing about what we did back in 99, 2000 with the Yankees, and we continued it after that with companies like Legends Hospitality, and then, at RedBird, with On Location with the NFL, it was always it wasn't a investment committee memo as much as it was a business plan. And, now valuations today are so high, and I've been vocal about the fact that there is a bit of an asset inflation bubble. I think you have to work even harder to underwrite those kind of business plans to be good fiduciaries for your capital. There's definitely a need for capital in sports. The question is, what's the entry point and how does it go to work?
So why do you think we've seen so much optimism? Because the demand has not been shallow in terms of buying these minority stakes. And you're seeing these private equity firms, and the NFL just opened up. This is even more private equity firms. What are they all attracted to where you're seeing this as maybe not such a good?
Look, you've had these facile notions going around for some time, which is, somewhat defying logic. It always goes up. Valuations always go up.
Perhaps because they have always gone up to this point.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's attracting now real capital, and yet there is no equity research. It's why this kind of forum is actually really important, because I think getting some of these concepts and dialogues out there will help, find a way to soft land some of this euphoria. But this notion that, it outperforms the S&P over a historical period of time, it always goes up. It's non-correlated to the macro. There are elements of all of that that's true. But I think if you're a student of history, you know that always going up is not a great arbiter for making an investment. But there's huge euphoria. Scaled capital has discovered this. You got to remember, in terms of the scaled capital tends to be these GP-LP type, formulations. And you're just a input into those portfolio constructions. So people have a desire to have sports from a diversification standpoint, and they sort of go to whatever's available for that exposure. I insist that, if you're going to invest in any of these intellectual property-based businesses, you have to go work that much harder. You can't take a private equity mentality. Private equity guys, want to just buy things, right? And if you're going to invest in IP-based industries, really defined as sports, media, and entertainment, I think you got to take the approach of sort of underwriting business plans, skating to where the puck's going. Today, when you look at this whole situation, I'd say, when I talk to every piece of the value chain in sports, everyone's sort of asking, is there any more juice left in the squeeze? Whether if you're on the distribution side, media rights, form of distribution, streaming, people are relying on the next thing.
And your answer to that question is?
Look, I think that for the best, you have a flight to quality going on right now. Things have been priced to such a level that it's not surprising that you see things like the Super League in Europe, or you see basically, if you're a media rights distributor, you're going to be paying these prices, you're going to want the best stuff. The problem for that is that's not great for the ecosystem of sports. Sports is so valuable because in any given Sunday, Team 20 can beat Team 1. That uncertain human element is so important to sports, and yet the money is now going to the big markets, to the big teams, and it's leaving the other guys behind. That is a problem. And so there needs to be some normalization and a soft land here in what I see as a bit of an asset bubble. But I can say in a very intelligent way that there is an asset inflation bubble in sports right now, at least on the team side, and still say that it is a great place to invest. All I'm saying is it's not just about buying in. It's going to be about underwriting, new forms of monetization around the flywheel of revenue generation that goes to the intellectual property.
What are a couple ideas that you're considering of ways to create new companies around that flywheel? Can you give us a couple examples?
Yeah, sure. Look at college. College is obviously going through a new phase. Capital now, this kind of capital has discovered college. It's been catalyzed by the fact that there are now capital needs at the university and conference level by virtue of NIL somewhat being hijacked by the transfer portal. Donors typically have stepped in to fill holes in capital needs, and now they're being pulled away more times than not by the need to keep a player or players on a team. So when you enter that situation, it's very interesting to me because it sort of captures the 30-year transition that I've had in sports. There's an initial capital need, but then that capital need brings with it the possibilities for strategic transformation. When you look at, if I ask you what's the second most popular sport in America, it's actually college football, right? And they're part of the football nation, football ecosystem. The NFL is best in class, but college football is what pays for the entire college sports ecosystem, and the fan base is so. I would argue the fan base is even more tied to it than even at the professional level, and it's very local and it's very distributed across the country. So the opportunity to come in, solve a short-term capital situation, and yet set it up strategically for where it should go. Where it should go is that college sports, whether at the university levels or whether at the conference level, it's the same thing that I've dealt with my whole career. Great holders of intellectual property, a fan base that really wants to consume this, and somewhat anti-cyclical, and yet not really having the ability to build business plans around that intellectual property monetization. That's what's so interesting here. So whether it's helping them own their own properties co-business, helping them own the economics around a game day, helping them renovate stadiums and providing the servicing of those stadiums like we did with Legends Hospitality or even on location with the NFL. All of that stuff sort of comes to fruition in this one moment. And so it's so funny. Here we are in 2025, and I've been doing this for 30 years, and yet it's almost a deja vu and coming full circle yet again to the same elements. And so I have a view. I remember 10 years ago, when people asked the question, where's the next frontier? The answer I got back 10 years ago was, you got to go to China. Right. And even then, I think we said, I'm not so sure you have to go to China. There's some great stuff here stateside. It's just a question of re-underwriting them.
Right.
And this college opportunity sort of proves that out.
Okay. I want to go back to the ownership and teams. You are the controlling owner of AC Milan, a European soccer club in Italy. I'm guessing based on your answer, you don't have much interest in becoming a minority owner in the NFL. You're not one of the private equity firms that are currently even eligible for that, but sounds like you're not interested in that.
No, it's not. And again, that's not pejorative. It's just that it's not what I do. If we're going to deploy capital, we're going to have a seat at the table.
Would you be interested in being a controlling owner of a major U.S. sports team?
Yes. But the entry prices today are not something that I find compelling. And again, that is a short-term statement. That does not mean that in any way that I question the long-term viability of these. I still think sports is in America is the best must-carry content that you will find. I don't like the entry prices right now because the underlying business plans are not there to really pay for it, and it relies on a certain assumption on media rights trajectory. No one has figured out really, truly how to monetize the live event. There's a need for, and we've seen, since we started Legends back in 15 years ago, there's been a huge wave of renovated stadiums, new stadiums, and infrastructure, which is fantastic. But consumers today want to consume this content, whether it's streaming or whether it's television or whether it's in the live event, and they want to be more interactive. the ability to provide for that is what's going to lead to the next wave of revenue generation.
I guess subtly baked into that answer, though, of yes, I would like to be a controlling owner. No, I don't like the entry point for valuation, is an assumption on your end that perhaps those valuations will come down. Do you think that will happen?
It's very interesting because I think we've all been watching this, and it's sort of LIFO. It's like, everything, the mentality is to look at the last trade and assume a markup.
You just saw it with the Celtics, right? Which is a $6.1 billion valuation. They don't even own the stadium.
I actually think it's $6.6 billion.
$6.6 billion, right? That's right. Yeah, depending on how you
correct. With the two-stage deal.
Right.
And so, look, obviously there's tremendous scarcity value, and I think that trade, really supports the notion, and it's a valid notion. There's tremendous scarcity value that gives you some fundamental foundation for these valuations. My call to arms to everybody in the industry is how do you set up a business plan to get a return at these kind of valuations? And I'm pencils down right now in terms of that. Having said that, look, take Fenway Sports Group. That was the one time in my career where I decided to be a junior partner and not the primary partner in a minority position, because I was I had such a strong conviction around the quality of that ownership and management team. And they also were sort of first to really diversify and create sort of a holding company platform. You see the results at Liverpool speak for themselves. You see what they've done since their ownership with the Red Sox. And now they're sort of out in front, as we're the selected group to come in and partner with the PGA, all around the same stuff. And so that's a new model that's actually really interesting. And, and I've learned a lot, being, a junior partner to those guys on that. And that's, and I also have the S Network investment. So when I retired from Goldman, we sold that and then bought it back with Amazon and the Yankees a few years ago. And that's interesting because now we have a seat at the table, even though that's not investing directly in sports teams. We're invested in the intellectual property of the Yankees, and we now have a seat at the table in hopefully helping Major League Baseball think through the defeasance of the RSN model towards a different type of media distribution model.
We've seen this trend of these sort of conglomerate ownership groups, right? So we'll own a team in baseball and soccer, and in their case, it's Red Sox and Liverpool, as you mentioned. I'm curious from your seat at the table, because I know, for instance, when I talk to Red Sox fans, I think there's been a little bit of consternation recently that they haven't spent like they were spending 5-10 years ago on particular talent, and they have wondered, well, is this conglomerate ownership like reallocating the resources? Is ownership thinking differently about the team now than they were back then because they have more on the table? They have different assets. Is that happening?
It's not because of the diversification in the portfolio. It's that the nature of what it means to own a sports team has changed dramatically. In the old days, owning a sports team was hobbies for rich guys. That is no longer the case. These are multi-billion-dollar industries, multi-billion-dollar companies. They're live event entertainment companies rooted in great sports. That transition is what's going on that you're referring to. And so I don't think it's got anything to do with the fact that Fenway, for example, owns the Penguins and the Red Sox and Liverpool and its piece in the PGA. It has, if anything, that gives them an opportunity to bring best practices across all of that, right? But what's going on today that is leading to somewhat of this discomfort, whether it's asset inflation or some of the things we've talked about, is that sports is becoming a multi-billion-dollar live event entertainment industry. And there's going to need to be a transition. I go back to my point to you earlier, which is, where are the analytics and the equity research and the street following this stuff? Where is that? If these things are trading in multi-billion-dollar levels, where is that level of inertia? I come on programs like this because I want to get out there, at least my perspectives on this from what I see doing hand-to-hand combat, because I think the more we can get that out there, the more informed everyone will be. That'll soft land things a bit, and it'll be good for the ecosystem.
All right, let's talk about the media rights, because it strikes me that the obvious way that we may see a dip in valuations is if we start to see a dip in the media rights deals. And we know that that's not going to happen for the NBA for a while. They just signed an 11-year deal. I don't see any possible way that's going to happen for the NFL. I do think that it's a little bit more of a question mark for what we see with some of the other sports. Let's start with baseball, because obviously you mentioned you created the Yes Network. What do you think we are going to see in terms of the RSN model in these next few years? And by the way, how does the Yes Network play into that transition? Because I think what baseball wants is to pull all the local rights back. But I can't imagine the Yes Network is going to be like, sure, take our rights and do whatever you want with them.
Yeah, great question. So the one thing I'd say on media rights, if it just from a high level, you're going to have certain properties where it's going to be a question of the slope of the curve, right? And so is it going to be, the NFL is one like that. The NFL is going to keep going up. The question is just what's the slope of that? Of that curve. There are going to be others that you potentially could see contraction, and then you're going to have new entrants, and it's going to be a lot harder for new entrants to get a seat at the table. With regards to Major League Baseball, look, I'm more bullish on Major League Baseball, particularly now. I think Rob and the team at the league office have done a very good job in making it more of an entertaining product. But the media rights monetization in baseball was centered around what we pioneered 20-something years ago with Yes. Right, the RSN model. Today, RedBird owns Yes with the Yankees, Amazon. We own New England Sports Network with Fenway Sports Group. And Major League Baseball is going to go through a transition where they are going to probably look to centralize what is a great amount of content that's very, very nationally distributed. The great thing about baseball is it's a national product with very local roots. And that's that is a real unicorn, right? To have that kind of tonnage of coverage and properties on both a national and local level. How to figure out how to monetize both a national and local product is always been the question. We pioneered the RSN model, which emphasized local. And I think now, given where everything is going and how everything is priced, the emphasis is going to be more on nationalizing. I think that baseball will do very well having groups like the Yes Network and NESN, the Yankees, the Red Sox, and there are others like the Cubs and LA and other cities anchor what ultimately will be a centralized media company, frankly, that broadcasts all the games. And there's going to be, however, different viewpoints amongst the teams. The big markets is, the challenge baseball always has is there's a subtle tension between the big markets and the small markets. Sure. They both need each other. You're not going to have a situation where you have a break off like the Super League, where the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Cubs, and the Dodgers only play themselves. If the media distribution guys, they look at the paradigm and they say, would they love a World Series that's like last year where you have the Yankees and the Dodgers? That's a national product, and that's a great product, right? But it's not, baseball is valuable because, in any given year, you're not going to have. You're going to have a team that came out of nowhere that's challenging one of those guys. So I think that you're going to see the punchline is you'll see a comprehensive restructuring of the economics around baseball in total. And part of that will be the media rights and the way it's distributed. Part of it's going to be revenue sharing. Part of it's going to be, the relationship with the players. And everybody needs to Venn diagram themselves and have a seat at the table in figuring this out together. That's the story of the new world. The old days where there was this sort of conflict between the players and ownership. And now you introduce a third ring, which is capital, and third-party capital. That's all got to change. And I see this across everything, whether it's sports or whether it's the stuff I do in media and entertainment. The Venn diagram concept, which is how I invest and how I think, that has never been more needed and more prevalent. Every constituent in this value chain needs each other. They're interdependent, and they got to work together collaboratively to get to a restructured model.
You hinted at it, but do you think maybe we are headed toward a situation where there is an actual company that is developed with the equity stakes of these big markets to equalize the value of the media rights?
Yeah, absolutely. See, I think about all of this in terms of a company. You're absolutely right. Whenever I've approached these situations of dislocation or transition, I think the private sector capitalistic mentality of thinking about them as companies, not leagues, not big teams. These are live event entertainment companies, and the opportunity to actually create a centralized media company with all the games, the tonnage of games that you have in any season, that is something that all media distributors would be interested in.
Are those talks ongoing?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I think there's a lot of discussions about how, if, when And my contribution to it is, I bring scalable capital, and I bring, two pieces that could be interesting, which is the Yankee intellectual property and the Red Sox intellectual property. And the question is, how can we help? How can we get this to the next phase?
RedBird is also involved in the ongoing transaction of the merger between Skydance and Paramount. I can't believe we're still talking about this deal, which has not closed yet. I would imagine maybe you're also surprised we're still talking about this deal that is not closed yet. But I'm curious how much sports played into the rationale behind the thinking of doing that deal.
Look, it wasn't that it was a front driver, but it absolutely was something that gave us more conviction around the opportunity and the investment thesis. One of the things I said to the CBS Sports guys at one point was, if RedBird is, one of the owners of this in partnership with you, how does that change the way you guys think about, the monetization of what you do? And that's really the new world, right? It's, the current paradigm is, you have auctions for media rights, and the top buyer wins. In the new world, as I said, fans want more engaged interactivity. They want to see behind the scenes. They want scripted and unscripted programming. You can't get around the fact, and this is not a pejorative thing, but sports, there's the integrity of sports in terms of the competition, and then there's the entertainment aspect to it. And more people want both. They want the entertainment part of it, and they don't want to impinge at all on the quality of the play. And that's the opportunity, I think, with CBS Sports.
The Paramount deal continues to slog along. Do you feel like the FCC's treatment of it, the Trump administration's treatment of it, has been fair?
Look, I can't talk about any of that. We're pretty much on the sidelines and can't get involved. Obviously, I hope for a resolution to all of this, but we're not, in any way around it or in any active way. So can't talk to it.
Do you feel like we are headed toward a world where ultimately, maybe it doesn't happen 5 years from now, the NFL pulls out, uses its opt-out rights, but we are headed toward a world where the big tech companies are the ones that own all of the major media sports rights?
Again, look, everybody wants to grab for sort of a binary outcome. I think you're going to see both. I mean, CBS has great broadcast reach, and it also has a streaming platform. You're going to see those two things constantly playing out. And so it's not just that, to date, you've not seen Silicon Valley largely defined, but coming into sports, there's been elements of it, obviously, and
it does
probably
seem to be slowly increasing.
It is.
Direction.
It absolutely is, because it's a very competitive marketplace, and the one thing that really speaks for itself is sports programming. I mean, it is the best, no matter what anybody says, and we can. And again, I come back to, we can talk about whether there's a bubble or whether there's asset inflation, but at the end of the day, this is still the best must-carry content nationally and locally. And that won't change. The question is, if we want to re-underwrite another leg up in terms of valuation trajectories, you've got to be able to underwrite the underlying economics. And in order to do that, you got to answer the question, well, how's broadcast and streaming going to play together? And the only thing I'm pretty confident in, it's not going to be binary. Both will play.
Right.
It's just a different type of.
So this idea of will the Super Bowl ever be streaming only? Like, you don't think that's anywhere near?
No.
I want to talk about a couple of your investments, which are particularly interesting to me. UFL, which is the combination of the XFL and the USFL. The history of leagues that have been sort of the sideline leagues to the NFL, they've all generally failed. Why is this one intriguing to you? And let me preface your answer with another question, which is, if your answer is, we want this to be more of a developmental league for the NFL, why not just make it a developmental league for the NFL?
Okay, so I think the fundamental difference in the way we've approached this over the last several years versus what's been done in the past is we went into it not wanting to compete with the NFL. So we went into it with a view that we wanted to be a worthy participant in the NFL's ecosystem, which obviously one aspect of that is to be the development league. What really gave me conviction around the UFL, first of all, once again, I approached it as, building a live event entertainment company rooted in NFL quality football. That is a very important premise.
Is it really NFL quality football, though? It's like NFL light.
Well, it's interesting you say that. Let's go back to what underlies that. every year you can only have 53 spots on an NFL team, and every year coming out of college and coming down from the NFL are more than enough quality NFL players. And so the thing that ultimately convinced me to take a run at this was that I could field an NFL quality team. So if you look at the play, and that obviously attracted the attention of ESPN and Fox, who distribute our games and have invested in the UFL. They see the same thing. It's NFL quality football. There's no doubt about that.
I'm just help me understand that though, because definitionally, I think if these guys were NFL quality, they would be in the NFL.
No, but that's my point. My point is that there's a limited number of spots on an NFL roster.
The team. So if they're not on
they
the
do.
team,
And every year, here's one of the KPIs for the UFL is that every year our best players go to the NFL.
Right, but then they're at the bottom. I mean, how many UFL players? It's stars.
No, but it's constantly recycling. And then, of course, there is the development aspect to it as well. I mean, there's no shock absorber between college and the pros in football, number one. Number two, people would like to have NFL quality football all year round if they could. So, our season starts right after the Super Bowl and continues on to early summer.
So I agree with that. So here's my question, which is why I prefaced it that way. It strikes me that I'm a big 49ers fan, and I'd used this example before, that when the 49ers drafted Trey Lance, this was a guy who clearly had not played enough football. He needed snaps.
Mm-hmm.
But then he gets injured and Brock Purdy takes over, and now there's nothing for him because he can't be a starter because he hasn't played enough.
Right.
But he's too good to play in the UFL, so he withers away as a backup or third-string quarterback without an ability to play snaps. But if there were a 49ers AAA team, he could get those snaps, become a better player. There would be interest in him in the 49ers NFL landscape because he would be tied to that franchise still, and everyone would win. And so I guess my question to you is, why doesn't Roger Goodell make the UFL have these franchises directly tied to other teams like we see with the G League and like we see in Major League Baseball?
Yeah, look, I mean, that is a possibility. And, you should assume we have a very close relationship with the league. The league has been incredibly supportive of what we're doing on rules innovation, health and safety for the players, and the development aspect itself. If you look at our coaches, all our coaches are former NFL coaches. And so in that example that you used, he can come down to one of our teams. And I would say it doesn't have to be that we're affiliated with the NFL teams, but that is certainly a possibility. What was the premise of the UFL? One premise of the UFL is that if we can deliver NFL quality football, we should be able to leapfrog MLS and be the 5th most valuable league in the country. That was the premise. And so that's not suggesting that we're going to be the wrong orientation is that this is NFL light or mini-me NFL. That was the constructs of the things in the past where everybody wanted to compete with the NFL. There's definitely an element where we're the development league, and it's going to be and it should be, if we do it right, going back to one of my earlier points, it should be a more entertaining form of football.
But is it today? Like, the ratings are way down.
They're not, actually. The ratings are not down. We actually have, if you look at the distribution that we have with ESPN and Fox, we outperform MLS 4-1, and from a rating standpoint, and we outperform MLB, or hockey rather, 2-1. And so I actually don't think that's the case. The live event, we're still figuring out the venues. So the live event, is still challenged, and we really need to play in, if the paradigm is to take a national quality product and put it into these local markets to compete against what else is available in those markets, like in MLS, then we got to get the venues right, and we haven't been able to get the venues right yet.
I also want to ask about your investment in SpringHill, LeBron James company. Yeah. What was the investment thesis there? That company, it just went through a merger with Whole 73. Like, there was reporting around that the company was losing money. Like, what is it that you feel is sort of the end game there for you guys?
Look, the end game is that there is no credible programming that talks to certain demographics and takes a consumer orientation to it, where you can, launch products around the programming, scripted and unscripted. The company actually performed extremely well year over year in the time that we've owned it on the top line, on the revenue side. There's real demand for this. getting, any of these, new companies always go through a J curve in terms of actual cash flow monetization, and part of the interest in merging with Fulwell and very talented guys, Ben Winston and James Corden, there is a virtue to scale, and there's a virtue to global diversification. But it really goes around, again, this sort of convergence between, scripted and unscripted sports content and an entertainment factor. This also lends itself to sort of consumer products and the ability to launch products around, some of this content.
I believe I heard you say at one point that you may be interested in, or perhaps LeBron may be interested in owning an NBA team, and you might be there alongside of him. Is that still part of the picture for you?
Yeah, look, part of the benefit in that context, it was really around Fenway Sports Group. And, part of the benefit of investing in a platform company like that is it gives you the ability to consider playing in an ecosystem where, on the one hand, I'll say, it seems to me that, prices are just not attractive from an entry point standpoint, but but I'm not showing up, from a standing start. I'm showing up with a platform, with a diversified set of properties.
It's slightly different.
So it really gives you the ability to think like a strategic, which is what you really need to do today in sports. And so, yeah, that's still very much a possibility. I think people were waiting to see what the Celtics trade would result in terms of giving them some data point on what an expansion team would price out at, if that's the way it's going to go. And so we'll have to see.
Last question. You talked about how valuations steep for ownership, but there's maybe different ways that you can kind of invent companies around the flywheel. But if you were to start RedBird today, would the general sports ecosystem be the thing that you would target to start a business to invest in?
Great question. I was asked this question at a conference once in the last couple of years. They said, if you had $500 million today, where would you put it? It was a sports conference. And they expected me to say, in a team or something. And instead I said, I'd put it in one of my insurance companies. There's a gasp in the audience. And the reality is, if I was starting RedBird today, I would really focus on what differentiates us. RedBird at the end of the day is an intellectual property monetization engine. That covers, it just so happens that when I started 25, 30 years ago, no one, sports was not deemed to be an asset class. What's changed is now all of a sudden the new money that has come in claims that sports is an asset class. The funny thing about that is I've been doing this for 25, 30 years, and I don't even think it's an asset class yet. It's got all of the potential to be an asset class, but none of the fundamental underpinnings are there to really lean in and say, yes, definitively it's an asset class. One of the things I want to do is get it there. It's in all of our interests for that to be the case.
And you're saying it's not an asset class because of the equity research component that you were saying it doesn't exist, or other things as well?
Well, look at it. I mean, none of the underlying financial foundation stones are really in place to justify these valuations. And so it's an element of scarcity value. It's an element of, the best must-carry content. I mean, obviously, everyone talks about the 800-pound gorilla in the NFL. I mean, if you look at the top 100 programs last year, the NFL was, a huge part of that. And so that's all great. The question is this, and I keep coming back to it, and it's why if I was starting RedBird today, I probably would find a way to justify starting RedBird with the sports element. It's that there is so much positive investing that we can do if you take a company building mentality. So rather than just, again, if you asked anybody today what's investing in sports, they all think it's taking minority stakes in teams. And of course, my crowd, when they see something like that, they jump in because they see a business opportunity. But the problem with my crowd is that the KPIs, their metrics for success, is not building a business. It's about raising funds, right? And so ultimately, at the end of the day, in that construct, the guys that own the IP, they're not as well served by guys who just want to come in and raise funds as their KPI. Yes, raising funds is something that I need to be able to invest scalable capital. But, what really gets me excited is partnering with the New York Yankees or an NFL or a Dallas Cowboys or a Liverpool or, a Fenway, and finding ways to build new companies with terminal value appreciation around that intellectual property. So for the rights holder, they don't necessarily need to sell a stake in the mothership. They can go create a new form of IP monetization around the mothership. That's good business. And that's why probably I would get my head around, RedBird, if it was launching today, doing that, because that's the model I pioneered with Steinbrenner back in 99, 2000. And that model still holds true today. People ask me sometimes, like, who's your competitor? And, you know, I struggle with that because I don't want it ever to come across as arrogant. But the reality is we don't have a lot of competitors because I kind of am in a different business. I'm not in the thing that gets me up in the morning every day is not the burning desire to have to raise funds. It's I love going into a league office or a team office or, you know, a sports media company and figuring out how to you know, create new companies around that intellectual property. That's what I love.
Gerry, thanks for joining us.
You bet. Great to see you.
You too.